How do you think about doing things that are sort of maybe closer to the core, more incremental in scope versus bigger bets, riskier bets perhaps, maybe things that are a little bit further away from the core business?
Innovation for me is a tactic to actually solve problems, right? I mean, sometimes you don't need innovation to solve a problem, and continuous improvement is very important. Sometimes you just need like to do some tweaks on your product to actually get to that improvement, and that's really important, and you should continue to do that. That's really critical. But sometimes the problem requires really like a think out of the box and find a solution that's different than what exists. That's where innovation kicks, right? So I think it depends on case by case. For me, it's like we do with science. I mean, AI is not the solution for every problem, right? I mean, AI is just one way of solving a problem, and we tend to believe that it can solve everything, right? Maybe one day, but I mean, it's definitely a great solution for problems, but maybe some problems don't need it. It's just a simple solution that solves for that.
Leandro, thank you for being with us today. We met back, I think it was 2018, late 2018, when Highline Beta started working with you when you were at Kraft Heinz at the time. And back then, Kraft Heinz had this sort of growth innovation group called Evolve, and their job was to build new businesses beyond the company's core. And there was a focus on technology, software, and services, which was not Kraft Heinz' core business, and also a few food-related ideas. Then you joined McDonald's as a senior VP of global technology and digital. And actually, we worked with you there as well. And we were there in a different capacity this time, sort of helping innovation teams move faster with the right playbooks and methodologies and scorecards, more of an org design project. Today, and you're the CTO at Whole Foods and VP of technology at Amazon. We have not worked together there, and I'm really excited to learn more about what you're doing there and how things operate there. So, you've worked at some of the biggest, most well-known brands in the world. So my first question, how has the approach to innovation changed or stayed the same across a Kraft Heinz, McDonald's, and Amazon?
First of all, Ben and Marcus, thanks for having me here. Very happy to see you again, Ben. Yes, as you said, so I've been dealing with innovation in all these companies in the past, and I think I have a different snapshot of time on this company. So maybe they have evolved and are different than what my testimony going to say. But I mean, I can say that there's an evolution clearly that happened in my career, but also in these companies in terms of how you treat innovation. I see innovation clearly as a way of experimenting things, as a tactic for solving problems, of course. And I think this company have been learning about how to do that. I mean, from the early times where people were like just creating chief innovation officers and trying to actually separate it from the core of the business, which is clearly a mistake. And I think to the evolution that we see more people really like embracing failure, embracing experimentation. That's actually what you do here at Amazon pretty well. And I think these companies have been evolving, and I hope they are actually more capable to do that these days. We started to plant a seed there. But the main difference is really like understanding innovation as a way to experiment solutions for problems and a way of like really living out of a problem that you have, how to solve that problem in a way that only innovation can do. And it includes really like a trust part of it. So you need to earn trust in terms of believing in failure, believing that you're learning on that failure, and believing that you're actually fast enough to pivot and change the solution for something that actually works. And these companies are not very, in the past, I mean, companies that work like Kraft Heinz and McDonald's, they were not really like a very comfortable failure at that time, right? So, I mean, I think some companies misunderstand experimentation with pilot and rollouts, right? I mean, when you have a pilot of dates, go live dates and stuff like that, you're not experimenting, right? Because experimentation is prone for failure. So we cannot have a roadmap for success and something that you're prone for failure. So you need to understand the difference between these two things. And I think this company has been learning about that, and definitely Amazon is a good example of how this could be successful, right? And you see the evolution happening, and I think blending technology with business as well is important. Like having like a single-threaded ownership, that's something I consider very important for innovation as well. These companies are going to that model, from what I know. So I think this is the evolution, and definitely in Amazon, I think we are in the top of that.
And I think it's really interesting as you have, CPG, QSR, technology, grocery, that sort of category. Maybe we can geek out a little bit here, just go a bit deeper in some of the uniquenesses that you've experienced in the operating model between them.
Yeah, that's a good point because honestly, CPG and retail overall normally have the sense of being conservative and are like really like a down to earth because they know. I mean, when you deal with customers every day, I mean, you have to be careful about what you experiment and how you experiment. So there is this kind of rejection to failure that's natural, right? We cannot fail in front of the customer, right? So, but I think the operating model is different, and of course, when you think about Amazon, it's a different way of approaching retail. You're approaching retail from an innovation technology first, which is not the case definitely for any of the other companies, which actually take more technology as a first as a necessary evil, and then later as a kind of way of maybe helping me to grow, but not really the core of the business ever, right? So that's the difference in operating model for sure. And I think I still see a lot of CPG and retail companies still like not embracing technology and innovation as they should because they're afraid of how much it costs, how much it could be damaging their operations and brand, right?
Right. So you've mentioned failure now. I don't know how many times you've said the word failure, Leandro, so far, but quite a few times, which is interesting.
He's
So,
embracing it.
which is good. How do you help a company? Now, maybe Amazon already had the right mindset, and you can speak to that. But how do you help other companies, or what advice would you provide other people who are in organizations where failure is a bad word and they're not embracing that, and therefore, by extension, not embracing experimentation? How do we help companies handle that process and get better at running experiments and innovating by accepting the reality that sometimes they'll fail?
I think that's a very good question. First of all, failure cannot be alone. I mean, it has to be together with a kind of framework or a way of working or operating model, right? So, meaning that failure means you have to react fast and have to pivot fast. And what we cannot allow when you are accept failure is to let the failure last for long, and then you invest a lot of money and then don't react to that, right? Don't learn from that failure. So we need to guarantee that these companies have to guarantee that when you have a model like that, you have to be able to have fast decision making, fast pivoting, and have the data enough to really decide where to go with that failure and what you learn on that failure. If you don't have this really like a fast shipping model where you're shipping a different version or showing to the customer a different version of your solution fast enough, this failure is going to become just a real expensive failure and not going to learn anything from that, right? So being able to pivot and react really fast to failure is the most important thing than the failure itself, right? And that's why I believe in models like the single-threaded ownership model, where actually you kind of create small teams with like 2 pizza team engineers and like some product managers and people that understand the business and they're able to really take decisions on their own. I mean, they're like the owners of their own business, meaning that inside those parameters of investment and time, they can take whatever decision they want, right? And actually move fast instead of like having this committees where we involve like 6, 7 functions different and try to decide where to go with that failure, which actually is very expensive as we know, right? So we really need to guarantee these companies can be fast enough to react and to pivot when needed on their experimentation.
And a lot of this is happening kind of at the core or near the edge of the core. What is your advice to really balancing a bit about that need and drive for experimentation with the ability to have operational consistency?
Yeah, I mean, things like A/B testing and ability to really test for a portion of your customers or your users is pretty important. I mean, otherwise, you cannot experiment on your core business fully, right? I mean, without it's almost like we have this concept of one-way door, a decision or two-way door. It's kind of, if you experiment something to your whole population of customers or users, it's like a one-way door almost. It's very costly to kind of roll this back, right? So you need to have a way of testing in a percentage of your customers and grow in a gradual way. And I think McDonald's, we are doing that quite well. I mean, in every experimentation we did, we were very successful on the digital side with the new app, the mobile app, and everything we were launching. We're able to really like go like in a very small growth of that population that we're using that app and pivot enough on time to like avoid like really bad changes in the operations. And I think that's really key. I mean, don't test in your core without really like having a way to roll back it, right?
And how are you, Leandro, prioritizing experiments? So, I mean, you can do 1,000 things, maybe even more than 1,000 things at any given point in time. So how do you look at prioritization to decide what are the best experiments to run, or the biggest wins that we think we're going to have?
I think the first thing is the best experiment is the cheaper and faster one, right? The one I can really put in front of the customer as soon as possible and see how it's working. So that's the first prioritization. I think the second one is we will be able to acquire the data enough to really decide if that's the right solution or not for the experiment. So sometimes the experiment is great, but I don't have a way really to test if it's really effective or not. So maybe that's not a good experiment to go ahead with, right? So there are some things that actually inform you about how to prioritize experiments. Experiments that are faster and cheaper, easy to collect data and decide if it's the right solution or not. And you can actually test the market fit well as well. So I think these are the three main parameters to decide.
And what would you say, Leandro, is can you put a time on fast or a number on cheap? Are we talking a week? Are we talking 6 months? I'm sure it varies experiment by experiment, and it varies if it's digital or physical, but how long are these experiments? In your mind, how much time do you give something before you say, we don't have enough data, we don't have enough conviction?
I think if it's purely digital, I would really be concerned if experimented after two sprints cannot generate some kind of a response from the customer already, right? Could be 2 months in some cases, or 2 weeks. It depends on how quick your sprints are, your shipments are, right? It has to be really fast in my view for digital. For physical, as you know, it depends, right? Sometimes you have to involve hardware creation and stuff like that, which actually takes time, right? Or we can do like we were doing in the Kraft Heinz time. Sometimes you would just like emulate it to have the hardware, even if you don't, just to kind of be able to receive the response from the customer, right? Fake it. And that's also possible, but it has to be as soon as possible, definitely. Any experiment that says that as you call it, the minimal lovable product or the minimal viable product is like 6 months ahead, I start doubting if that's the right experiment, honestly.
And have you seen any, variance in between the way Amazon and also the Whole Foods ways of doing things? Has it been a great mesh into how things are done together, just from your perspective?
I think it's great when you can combine the knowledge of the business and the way Whole Foods runs grocery business with the way Amazon runs innovation and experimentation. So we are able to combine these two things. That's great, because one important prerequisite for good experimentation is understanding the business well as well. So you have to know what you're testing and for what's the problem, right, that you're solving. And I think in Whole Foods and Amazon, we can combine these two things. We know very well what the problems are in Whole Foods. And I think in Amazon, we can come with great experimentations to test the solutions for this problem.
Right. I spent a lot of time actually working in the QSR innovation space for Tim Hortons. Did some work there over the years. And, I thought there's always an interesting balance between looking at innovation as bets, but also having speed. Speed in the perspective of how you validate and do experimentation. Have you really seen a different level of speed that's translated into the way Amazon operates versus obviously QSR side of things?
Oh yeah, I think the idea of shipments every week or stuff like that is not really common in any QSR and even CPG organizations, right? That's kind of it's hard to get to that, by the way. You have to have the right model in place to obtain that, right? I remember in McDonald's when I joined, sometimes a shipment would take 6 months to a year, right, to happen. And then you cannot experiment in that model, right? You have to solve that first, right? You have to be able to ship every week or month at least to be able to experiment. So there are some prerequisites that you have to achieve. But these companies are evolving, and I think they're getting there. When you get there, then you can really start properly innovating and experimenting. And also, the ability to do A/B testing is also key in that case, right? Even for physical life, you should be able to test in one store, or at least in one POS in each store, for instance, instead of throwing it to the whole organization and break the operations.
Yeah, I remember at McDonald's, and I'm sure they still have test stores, and there was one in Chicago. We never got a chance to go to it, but I really wanted to go to it because it was one of those, testing menu items, testing different, technology inside of the store. But I still think the cycle time is just always a challenge in that physical environment.
Yeah, we call here seed stores, which is kind of the same, but that's very important, because one thing on the fast decision-making part of the innovation is you should be able to influence metrics and change the way you calculate metrics and stuff like that. And if you have a store where people are measured by these metrics, I mean, it's very hard to do changes in decisions, right? So you have to have some flexibility to say, you know what, you should not evaluate that specific seed store the same way because they're going to be impacted by my experimentations all the time, right? So let's change the way we validate their performance. So that's pretty critical.
Right, because the experiments can actually affect the performance of the people and the metrics they're trying to hit. And you could be doing something that's having a negative impact on sales or throughput of inventory or whatever it is. And then the people who are being measured against that are stuck because you're experimenting.
Exactly. And if you are innovating, you have to be able to pivot fast. And you cannot be like blocked by, I cannot do that because it's going to be impacting how people is performance managed and remunerated, right?
So a nice balance between meticulously structured and maybe a little bit of focused chaos, you'd say.
Exactly. Yeah.
So tell Leandro, you mentioned data a couple of times. I know you're a data person because you're a tech person. How do you think about experiment? And you mentioned hitting certain metrics. So how do you balance, or what is the balance between using the data from an experiment and your gut, or maybe not your gut exclusively, but the team's gut, the instincts versus the data? How are you balancing that?
I think there are two things. First, I treat gut feeling as a data augmentation in a way, right? I mean, it's basically, there are some patterns you don't find in the data directly, but if you have experience, you may find it just because of your experience, right? You know what's behind that data, right? So that's what I call gut feeling, right? It's really, you have to start with the data. I don't believe in gut feeling starting from scratch, right? It has to be a data augmentation in my view. So yeah, many times I don't have enough data to really know exactly what the patterns are, what the trends are, and I cannot know exactly what to do with that experiment. But the gut feeling helps me to say, you know what, I've seen that before, I've seen that trend and pattern happen. I think if you do that, you're going to actually achieve. So it's important as a something, right? And also, I think gut feeling is important to validate if the metric is correct, because metric is not reality, right? Metric is a representation of reality, and sometimes we mix it and we see people like chasing a metric, not the reality, right? Yeah.
Just to hit a certain target, even though the target may not actually achieve what you want to achieve.
Yeah, we need to separate gut feeling from desperation, right? Because sometimes I have to make it right because my money is going away, right? I mean, I have to do this right. And then I kind of, this is the standards of humans to like, you know what, let's be positive about that. Even if my gut feeling tells me, not sure, I think it's going the right way, right?
A bit of a wrestling match between gut and kind of the data, right? And I think also thinking that, success is not just the ROI, it's also the learning cycles, the learning velocity, I would say.
More important than even sometimes. Yeah, I agree.
And how do you think about problem identification? So you mentioned start with data. So you can start with data on the results side of an experiment and then say, not sure I have enough of it. I'm not sure it was the right data. Use my instincts to decide whether to keep going with an experiment or not. What about on the problem identification side? Because you said before, you know what the problems are, or Amazon knows what the problems are at Whole Foods. Are you using data there to identify problems? And what about gut there when somebody who's in a store or working on the digital Whole Foods product or an Amazon product says, I'm pretty sure the problem is X. And, how do you start with that problem identification space?
Yeah, I think it's much more risky to use gut feeling on the problem identification because it's very connected to bias, right? I mean, it could be, I think I know what the problem is because I've seen that before, but without looking at the data. So I prefer to really try to acquire the data on the problem identification in some way, like surveys, like monitoring what's happening in production or talking to customers directly and asking them. And of course, you still can use some gut feeling and some experience, but I mean, I think it's much more risky to use that on the problem identification than it is on the experimentation analysis part.
Right. So you want real conviction and evidence, let's say, on the problem before you would go and decide to go try to solve it through an experiment, and maybe a little bit more gut on the back end of that to say, well, this experiment, we're not just going to kill it instantly because we didn't hit a certain number.
Yeah. Having said that, I mean, sometimes you have to use a gut feeling in the problem identification as well, because you have to solve the problem. It's so important for you to solve that you have to really what we call here in Amazon, disagree and commit, right? Yeah, we don't have the right data to decide exactly what to do. Let's let's follow one thesis, right? The thesis seems more realistic as that one. Let's go to that thesis and test it. But then I think it's more important than ever to test and get feedback as soon as possible in this case, right?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it as well, though. The gut feeling also gets fueled a lot by the business side and understanding the business context. I think it gives you a good sense of just when you should move forward there. I always love to dive a bit deeper into just how you kill experiments. And I think specifically when you think about, Amazon and AWS, I mean, if they would have waited for AWS to be profitable, they would have made a terrible mistake. And so I'd love to learn a bit more about your perspective on just killing experiments.
I think in that case, I mean, when you start with the customer, focus on the customer, I mean, your goal is not to be profitable necessarily, right? Your goal is really guarantee that the customer likes and understand what you're offering and then actually buy it, right? So that's the most important thing. Of course, you have to have a path for profitability somehow, right? And I think the Amazon flywheel is pretty important in that case. I mean, you really keep evolving to get to a point where profitability becomes part of it, and you can continue invest and escalate, right? So scale, sorry. I think really the way we do it here is pretty much the right way. Really looking at okay, this is the metrics. So defining the metrics for innovation is pretty important. What you're trying to achieve, right? I mean, what's the value of what you're trying to achieve, and how can you use that to confirm that that's the right solution for that problem, right? That's more and more important. You have the wrong metric, and that happens more than you like. Sometimes you have the wrong metrics. And all the metrics are green, and you say, I'm not sure I should continue this experimentation, even if all the metrics green. So what's wrong? Wrong are the metrics, probably. You're not measuring the right things you should measure, right? So that's pretty important.
Got it. And maybe you can share a little bit of your experience and how you're thinking about incremental versus more growth or disruptive innovation. So there's lots of things that, and it could be experimentation on both sides. Always maybe focus on everything's an experiment no matter what. Maybe that's part of the answer. But how do you think about doing things that are sort of maybe closer to the core, more incremental in scope versus bigger bets, riskier bets perhaps, maybe things that are a little bit further away from the core business?
Yeah, as I said before, I mean, innovation for me is a tactic to actually solve problems, right? I mean, sometimes you don't need innovation to solve a problem, and continuous improvement is very important. And sometimes you just need to do some tweaks on your product to actually get to that improvement, and that's really important, and you should continue to do that. That's really critical. But sometimes the problem requires really a think out of the box and find a solution that's different than what exists. That's where innovation kicks, right? So I think it depends on case by case. For me, it's like we do with science. I mean, AI is not the solution for every problem, right? I mean, AI is just one way of solving a problem, and if sometimes you need it.
Are we sure it's not?
It's a bit early.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to believe that it can solve everything, right? Maybe one day, but I mean, it's definitely a great solution for problems, but maybe some problems don't need it. It's just a simple solution that solves for that. Again, faster and cheaper is always more important in my view.
And do you think, getting there from using different approaches, back from building, buying, and partnering, just what is your perspective now?
I believe in time to value, right? I mean, sometimes you need to deliver what the business needs to solve a problem. And sometimes maybe the MLP or the MVP is basically a 3P solution that's already in the shelf. Just implement that and start using it. It's just not a one-way door. It doesn't mean you're going to have to stick to that 3P solution forever, right? You can actually use that for now to actually answer for the immediate needs of the business, and then in parallel you build something that actually is better and differentiate you from the other competitors. Or sometimes, honestly, I mean, if it's a commodity thing that actually doesn't really matter if you are different than others on that, you just keep using the 3P forever, right? So I think it's totally possible.
So Leandro, you've used the term MVP, minimum viable product, and MLP, minimum lovable product, a couple times. I'm super curious. Are you using these terms inside of Amazon? Do you have a clear definition of what those terms mean? Is there one of those that you prefer? I get into this argument with, I'm not suggesting we're about to get into an argument, but I get into this argument. We might, but I get into this argument all the time with people who say the term MVP is done. It's dead. It's nobody understands what it means anymore. So then they went to MLP, minimum lovable product. And people are like, just because it's lovable doesn't mean it's viable. And, they're just running around in circles. So maybe just from your perspective, maybe the Amazon perspective as well, what do these terms mean to you? Are you using them inside the organization in a structured way?
Yeah, I use minimal lovable products always here. So I'm just using MVP just to translate to actually probably what some other companies do. But I mean, if you have a customer focus, and I definitely Amazon is the company from all the companies I work that has more of that, definitely like really like focus on customer first. MLP is a necessary thing, right? You really need to build something that's lovable for the customer. The customer have to, even if it's basic and have the minimum requirements on that, it has to be lovable. Customer really has to like it and really like adopt it. That's for me a very important part of this. Otherwise, you cannot get the engagement from the customer. You don't get the data that you need to kind of validate if that's the right thing or not. So that's for me. If you launch something that you don't get to the customer to use it, I mean, what's the point, right? I mean, what's the point of actually launching?
So are you using MLP? Is that part of the Amazon vernacular where people
Yeah.
are saying, let's build an MLP? That's super
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
And I think people, I mean, a lot of organizations we work with, everybody has that same level of orientation, but maybe we can go a bit deeper and really what does lovable mean to you?
I think, I mean, honestly, I never checked if the way I think about lovable is the way Amazon thinks about lovable. That's my opinion, honestly. But I believe very much that it should be focused always on the customer and see what the customer needs and how the customer is going to love what you're launching, right, or shipping. So that's what lovable means in that case. It's like maybe I can have an MVP that generates barely the metrics I want to validate. But if the customer is not adopting and the audience and the population of that customer that's using it is so small, I cannot get any statistical reference on what I'm launching, right?
Yeah, you're convinced. I'm still clinging because I'm old to the term MVP because I always felt like the V stands for viable, but viable in the eyes of the customer. That's how I always interpreted it. Not viable like I can make money off it, or viable like it worked, like it technically worked. That wasn't the point of it. It was always, customer first, validate it with them, prove that they want it. And that's what, to me, an MVP is. But I get it.
Yeah,
I think that's the risk of that, because some companies could take MVP as like if it compiles and doesn't generate any errors and I can launch and ship, that's viable already.
That's true. That's true. We built a thing, nobody uses it, but we'll still define that as an MVP. And that's where I think that terminology has gotten messy over the years.
Well, it's pretty much overdone, predominantly with the startup, ecosystem, and then looking into corporate innovation. Everybody's grasped to this, gravitated, I should say, around, that term. I mean, I'm curious just on thinking about the next area of scaling into scaling innovations. You think about Amazon's ability to just move fast and experiment quickly, but then also shift into commercial environments. Maybe we can talk a bit about, that element.
Yeah, scalability for me is part of the experimentation, and you need to always be think about the next step, right? I mean, you're gonna understand what's the results you achieved, and then you're gonna decide how to scale. You have to always to keep scaling your product, right? I mean, or either you pivot or you scale. I mean, you cannot stay where you are, right? There are only two options in my view: pivot or you start scaling it and then you start defining pilots and rollouts, right? For me, it's part of the plan. When you've proven that your solution is good enough and it's kind of solving the problems of the customer in a good way, you still start thinking about scaling and rolling out this. What you cannot have, and then I saw many times in the past, not in Amazon, but I mean, you have that product that's there, is not good enough to be scalable or to be rolled out, but it's not terrible to kind of kill it, right? To keep like this thing dragging for forever. And that's really a bad place to be, in my view.
Right, where it becomes a zombie.
Yeah.
Or maybe like a half-dead houseplant.
Yeah, exactly. So do you have is there in your mind or like a systematic way of thinking about pilots and scale? So, if something hits this threshold, we'll take it to 2 stores, or we'll take it to 10 users, and then we'll go to 10 is a small number, 10 to 100 users. Do you have a systematic approach that you try to consistently follow, or is it really case by case, project or experiment by experiment?
I think it's case by case. It's different from digital, from physical as well. I mean, when it's physical, you need to guarantee you have the right supply chain, the right distribution for that. You have the right ways of delivering what's needed at scale, right? So there are different ways of measuring that and seeing if you are ready or not, right? I mean, Sometimes it's great, but you cannot have like a national distributor or a national supplier that can provide that to you at scale, and then you cannot go ahead, right? So there are limitations that are different from physical to digital. I think digital should be easier to you to identify if you're ready to scale or not.
And do you think of, as you're scaling something, digital or physical, do you still think of that as an experiment, or do you feel like you've done the experimentation, you've gotten the validation that you need, from quantitative and qualitative data, and now you operationalize, and that's a different mindset for scale? Or is it still sort of this same mindset of let's keep innovating, let's keep experimenting, even while we're scaling?
I think if you are still trying to identify if that solution is the right solution for that customer, I think you're still experimenting. Even if sometimes you need to scale to experiment it better, right? I need 10 stores to really confirm that's the right solution for that. So that's still experimentation. You should be able to roll it back, right? It's different than when you say, yeah, that's the right solution. Let's now scale and roll out, when you know exactly what the version is, and then you can start shipping it to all the stores. Or
Ben, are you trying to like really balance out kind of agility and also structured execution? Is that what you're kind of hitting at?
Yeah, just sort of the difference between the sort of somewhat wild west of we're just running experiments, we're trying to learn, we're trying to validate something. Okay, we've got it. Let's call that the MLP for a moment. We validated this works. Now we have to operationalize it. We have to take it from 100 users to a million users, or one store or two stores to 50 stores. And is the skill set, the organization, the systems that we use to do that different? Or is the mindset sort of the same along the way, which is lots of rapid little experiments to validate that this thing is creating value? And now it's still a bunch of experiments, just bigger experiments at a bigger scale.
I think the way I see it is there's no two different change management process or two different operational process, just one. If for innovation or for no innovation, you have to get back to the core and to streamline this into your processes, right? So, yeah, if you're ready to roll out, you should use the same structure that you roll out anything in a company to roll out an innovation or a new product or a new solution. So, of course, sometimes you have some new requirements in terms of how to deploy it physically, right? But it should get back to the mainstream of the company. It cannot be like a separate thing, right? From operational perspective, you cannot run a separate operations for that.
Yeah, from our experience, we see a lot of leaders get pushback. So, what are your hacks to get that kind of big rollout support?
I think earning trust is one of the leadership principles of Amazon, and I believe that very much. You need to earn trust before because you're going to have to embrace failure. You're going to have to actually talk about investments. You're going to talk about like a change in the way operations run, and that requires trust. And that's something you need to acquire early on in the process by showing that you are measuring it properly, you're taking it the right way, you understand the business. That's the way to do that, right? It's like really like if you don't earn the trust early on, it's very hard to actually achieve whatever you want to achieve in your innovation.
And is the trust coming from the data, or is it also from just the ability to manage those relationships?
It's data, it's communication, it's writing a document that explains very well how you're thinking, how you want to evolve that, and have all the details that's needed for that to evolve, and what it means in 5 years' time, how this thing going to be running. Right? So really creating the trust on the plan itself and on the data that you're using to build the plan.
Did you think, Leandro, when you first joined Amazon and Whole Foods, about small wins first as a way of earning trust? If I can join here, do something, not go swing for the fences on some crazy new project, try to get some, small wins first, demonstrate ability to execute, deliver, learn the system, the culture, and everything else. Is that one of the ways you thought about it?
That's totally. If you cannot earn trust through like small wins and showing that you can evolve quickly, it's very hard to say, oh no, trust me, in 5 years we're gonna get to perfection, right? That doesn't exist, right? So we really have to be able to show and demonstrate small wins through data.
How has the time horizon changed for you? You've mentioned 5-year kind of horizons twice now. When you're thinking about getting to that point, when you're seeing momentum, just selling to get that buy-in with executives, has that shrunk now? And do you think it'll shrink even more in this new wave of AI being applied?
If you have a bold plan and you know where you want to get, you need to show the horizon, right? Where are you going to get to that, right? So that's the first start. And of course, you need to show how you're going to be winning and evolving every month, right? So it's kind of a, I'd say that the end game is a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan, but I mean, you have to show what are your monthly milestones to get there.
Have the 3 or 5-year plans ever been accurate?
They are not accurate by definition, but I mean, I think it's part of the earning trust is like to show that you can understand how to adapt the plan to what you want. But I mean, the principles and the mandate should not change, right? You have a thesis, you have to keep trying to prove that thesis, right? And you cannot be changing completely everything every month, right? It has to have some rationale what you're trying to achieve, right? What the goal is.
Yeah, I think the parallel for me there is with early stage startups. More along the lines of what we were doing, with you at Kraft Heinz with Evolve, building net new businesses, where you have to put sort of a 3-year or 5-year projections. It's based on nothing but assumptions. But if you don't demonstrate the thought process behind it, it suggests you don't really understand what you're doing. It doesn't. You don't really know the problem. You don't really know the solution. You don't really know the levers that you can pull to acquire more users or charge more money. And so most of the time, I don't think I've ever seen a 3 to 5-year plan from an early stage company that actually materializes. But it's the thought exercise of doing it that tells me you know what you're doing, or you actually don't know what you're doing and you're just winging it completely.
Yeah, I mean, the trust is more important than the plan in a way, right? I mean, you need to get the trust that you know what you're trying to do, what the plan is, and how to measure that you're getting there or not. Then you can pivot at any time, right? I mean, to your point, the only 5-year plans that materialize completely are the ones that are already bad at the beginning. You can say, yeah, they're going to fail anyway.
Yeah,
They
those ones,
materialize.
that's easy.
They
Those ones
materialize.
are gonna-
They materialize.
And I think what you're saying there too is it's a lot of just understanding the thinking is how you're building the trust, right? Really articulating the assumptions, adapting them. Those things become important. Often what we're seeing is this period of time where folks are wandering a bit, and the ability to kind of, you can wander for a while, but as long as you can articulate how these experiments, you're getting these learning cycles and you're applying it, you start building more of that trust to go for that kind of bigger wins. What do you see, even with these experiments and building trust, the balance between experiments that are going on the offense versus the ones that are more kind of defensive?
Yeah, I mean, if I understood correctly what you want to know, I mean, I first of all, I believe let's come back to the wondering part. First of all, when you're deciding a solution or a thesis, you have to wonder a bit. I mean, you have to really talk to people, have like a whiteboarding with a bunch of really smart people is really great. And then I think it's the way of actually defining potential solutions and theses that you want to test. And sometimes they are really about growth and about winning in the market and conquer a market share and not. And sometimes just to defend yourself against something that's coming from the competitors that you clearly see that is a threat for you, right? You really need to be faster on that, and then kind of maybe experiment even faster because there is a threat really clear coming to you, right? You have more urgency definitely on that case, right? When it's defensive.
Interesting. Makes sense. So Leandro, we haven't talked tech very much. You are a tech person. CTO, technical guy. And you mentioned AI already. So let's talk a little bit about AI. How are you thinking about the use of it, the implementation of it, the experimentation around it? What can you tell us about how you're really thinking about the applications of AI for what you're working on?
I think there are the obvious use cases. First of all, I mean, there are many problems that can easily be solved by AI, and we are doing that a lot here in many ways: supply chain, customer experience, customer service, internal things like code generation, ticket resolution. All that is definitely obvious use case. I think what's the challenge is, and we are trying to exercise that more and more, is what are the problems we couldn't solve before and now AI can let me solve? Like things that I thought were impossible. Like I have this bias that I cannot even try to solve that because there was no solution. Eventually now there are solutions. So like this thinking differently about the solution of problems and resetting that a bit and say, okay, now I have different tools that I can actually use to solve that problem. Let's look at this problem differently, right? I think that's the key of differentiation that AI can cause more than just the obvious use cases. And And I think we are finding this in many ways, in many cases that are pretty interesting and could really solve important problems for a customer, right?
So would you say that AI is pushing it beyond the core a bit? You're thinking a lot of the work that you've been doing has been on the core or the edge of the core, and AI, as you describe, is allowing you to kind of reimagine more areas to kind of pursue.
Yeah, when you have experience, you are like tied to some constraints that you know exist, right? And I think AI break these constraints and say, maybe let's look at maybe these constraints don't exist anymore, or they can be actually expanded or reduce it, right? I mean, uh, what I'm talking about is really like a leaving your gut feeling aside a bit and trust the model to generate some solution that may be surprising for you.
Right. Any hesitancy? I mean, Amazon's a tech company, so I wouldn't imagine there is, but Whole Foods is not necessarily. Any nervousness around the use of AI or its implications around what it's going to do for resourcing or other things along those lines?
I mean, first of all, I believe we should always focus on the customer, and sometimes you need to have human. Many times you have to human in the loop, even in an AI model solution, to guarantee the response or the solution is actually supporting and delivering what the customer needs. Right? That's definitely the case. So I don't believe that it can solve for any problem without a human in the loop in many ways.
Fair.
No, I think that our focus is more on like guaranteeing we can actually solve the problems of the customer first and actually have more productivity than really like thinking about eliminating the human in the loop. So really like more focus on guaranteeing we get the productivity we need and the customer satisfaction and the customer experience that we need. That's more important and more the focus that we're having in AI for sure.
So an opportunity to create more value for the customer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like the idea of what you said there, Leandro, around AI may unlock problems or the solutions to problems that up to this point we had decided we couldn't solve, or we've given up on to some extent, or felt like we would just never be able to prioritize them because the tech wasn't available to us. And that takes a different way of thinking perhaps than the other stuff, which is just the efficiency, super important, but efficiency, productivity, which feels like an obvious fit where AI is plugging in everywhere. Then there's those net new, but what if we could do this? And what if we could do that? So does that change a little bit how the teams think about what problems that they want to even go chase and prioritize?
Yes, definitely. I think AI helps in every single step of and starting on the idea generation. Maybe, I mean, there will be some ideas that are generated by AI, not by the team, right? And the team just like tailor that and kind of prove a thesis out of that. So starting with AI and the idea generation and going through all the process, I think you can think about every single step differently now with AI.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Let me ask you then another question about another tech question. So how do you decide if a certain technology is a fad or not a fad, worth the investment or not worth the investment? And the thing that comes to my mind is metaverse. I'm not saying metaverse is not worth exploring. There's lots of people doing stuff in metaverse. I'm not trying to crap on all the people who believe in the metaverse. I just feel like there was a point in time a couple of years ago where that's where a lot of investment was going. And then it diminished quite quickly when the use cases didn't become as evident. And then AI emerged and ChatGPT launches, and that changes a lot of things for people. So how do you think about that R&D kind of tech bets that you're making and what has real application and what might not?
I think it depends on where you are. I mean, if you're really like innovating completely like in a very new like science project that actually requires a lot of R&D process, that's a different than what I'm going to say. My answer is more based on reality and what I need to solve the customer problems today, right? Instead of like in 5 years time, right? I think it's very easy to identify if a technology is a solution for the problems you're having now or not, right? I mean, is this technology can really help on that? If yes, how, and how are you going to be experimenting that? If I cannot do that, then it's the wrong technology, definitely, right? I mean, and every technology should be considered, right? I mean, RFID, for instance, is a technology that's used for, I don't know, 30 years, and sometimes it comes back to the table, so maybe that's a solution for that problem, right? I mean, and sometimes it will be AI, sometimes it's going to be something brand new, and it depends on what the problem is and how you want to solve that problem.
I was going to say, often it seems like just really following the developer communities and what progress they're making, because sometimes it takes a while for the solutions to really catch up to solving the problems for the customer.
The scalability, right? I mean, again, it even if I can experiment and test a technology, if I cannot scale that, why I would be considering even that, right? I need to scale that. That definitely should be a prerequisite, right?
Well, actually, that brings up a good point then. When you are doing early stage experiments on newer technologies, how quickly do you try to examine the scalability of that technology?
It has to be really early because, I mean, at least in my reality, it doesn't make any sense to kind of prove a technology or a solution if I cannot scale that in the next 3-4 years. But why am I even looking into that right now? I need to solve the customer problems today, right? Not tomorrow, not in 3 years' time, right? So I need, of course, then it's different than the R&D team that are looking at for solution for the future, right? And try to be more innovative there. That's a different kind of perspective, I would say.
Leandro, maybe I'll ask you one last question. In your arena, tech and innovation, is there something that you believe is true that other people or most other people would not believe is true?
No, I don't think so. I believe very much in some things that are true, but some people I would say are not as trustful as I am on these things. Like I believe very much on experimentation. I believe very much on like failing quick and pivoting and trying to find a solution for the problem. I believe in really like the STO model where we have like a ability to take decisions really fast and have ownership on the metrics. It doesn't matter if you're a tech, if you're a business, you have the same metrics. It's basically the successful metrics for that process or that product. That's what I believe. And some people believe less on that. I think they talk about it, but they don't believe it, they don't apply it. So I like to apply it because I believe very much on that.
Well, you love executing, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I was just going to say, talking about things is a lot easier than applying things. So,
oh yeah, I'm very much in favor of applying things and scaling things and rolling things out. Yeah.
Awesome. Leandro, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. It was great to catch up and have a chat. And thank you so much.
Thanks for the conversation. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much.